The heat came early that morning. Even before sunrise, the airfield already shimmered with the smell of burnt avgas, wet grass, and the metallic sting of tropical air. Dobodura, New Guinea, August 18, 1943. Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched under the left wing of a P-38 Lightning, wiping a film of grease from his hands onto his coveralls as he watched the young pilot check his gear. Lieutenant Robert Hayes was 23. Farm kid from Iowa, 6 missions, 0 kills, and this one, everyone suspected, would be the last head fly. Out on the runway, the engines roared in testing bursts, twin Allisons coughing against the dawn, while mechanics hurried past with fuel drums and ammo belts. The 38s Lump fighter group had been flying itself ragged for weeks, chasing Japanese Zeros over jungle and surf. Officially, their twin-engine Lightnings were the fastest, most advanced fighters in the theater. In practice, speed hadn't saved anyone. McKenna knew every line of the airplane, the twin booms, the heavy control cables running through them, the way the aluminum skin rattled when the engines throttled up. Had spent 8 months maintaining these machines, and had seen too many of them come back with holes punched through the wings, or not come back at all. What haunted him wasn't the roar of takeoff, it was the silence that followed when a plane didn't return. The doctrine was simple. It was printed on briefing room walls and drummed into pilots' heads from the day they arrived: never turn with a 0. The Mitsubishi Assam was lighter, sharper, almost half the Lightning's weight. It could pivot on a coin. In a turning fight, a 0 would slice inside a P-38's arc every time. American flyers were told to dive, shoot, climb, hit and run, but never to dogfight. Problem was, war's herent fought on paper. Up there, when tracers carved the air and G-forces crushed your chest, doctrine turned abstract. Pilots instinctively pulled harder, tried to follow, and the P-38's great flaw revealed itself: a hesitation, a subtle delay in roll response. It was like shouting into a telephone line that lagged a heartbeat behind. McKenna had felt that delay with his own fingers. When he rigged the aileron cables, there was always a whisper of slack, no more than 3/8 of an inch tolerated by factory specification. The cables ran from the cockpit, yoked through a labyrinth of pulleys in the twin booms before they reached the wings, at high speed. Aerodynamic forces masked the lag. But at low-speed turning fights, the kind pilots always found themselves dragged into that tiny delay meant death. A 0 could flip inside a turn before the Lightning even finished rolling. Head reported it before. The engineering officer said the tension was within limits. Lockheed's manuals backed him up. Adjusting it beyond spec would void the warranty and risk overstressing the control system. Rules were rules. No mechanic in the field had authorization to tamper with flight control geometry, so they tightened what they could, signed the maintenance logs, and watched more pilots die. In 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 Lightnings. On paper, most were pilot error. In the tents at night, the ground crews knew better. The Zeros weren't beating the Americans through bravery. They were exploiting milliseconds of physics, the breathing room inside that cable slack. McKenna wasn't the type to philosophize. He wasn't a hero, just a wrench turner with a good ear and steady hands. But every morning, when the squadrons lined up and he watched those kids climb into aluminum coffins, he couldn't ignore what he heard. The tone of each control cable when plucked a faint, low twang. The looser the cable, the flatter the note. Every plane on the line sounded just slightly off-pitch, like an orchestra tuned for disaster. That morning, as Hayes ran his pre-flight, McKenna could tell he was already halfway gone. Fear hid behind the pilot's grin, a smile stretched too wide, hands trembling when they shouldn't. Had seen it before in every man who suspected he wouldn't live to sundown. The P-38 looked magnificent, though, silver skin streaked with oil, twin tails catching the rising light. Its engines could haul it to Bon Trum Mfiet in level flight. It could climb faster than anything the Japanese had, but in a tight fight in that turning world of instinct and smoke became sluggish, trapped in its own engineering. McKenna remembered the names of the last 3 pilots he'd signed off: Chen, Morrison, Parker, each gone within weeks. Hay remembered standing on the flight line when their planes disappeared into the horizon, the empty bunk afterward, the chaplain reading from a slip of paper under the whine of mosquitoes. The army said they died, honorably. McKenna thought they'd died because of a few ounces of tension that no one was allowed to adjust. Hay had already argued, already written it up, already been told that factory standards exist for a reason. Still, the idea gnawed at him. What if that tolerance wasn't just a margin of safety, but the real enemy? Out beyond the revetments, the jungle steamed. Somewhere behind those green walls were the wrecks of their missing aircraft, twisted metal half buried in mud. The war felt both endless and absurd. Pilots too young to shave, flying machines too heavy to dance, fighting an enemy who turned war into art. At bay. Bunmui High, the PB-Mui Tams thundered down the strip, lifting one after another into the low Pacific haze. McKenna shaded his eyes, watching Hayes lightning rise and tilt toward the north. He told himself, as he always did, that maybe this one would come back. But deep down he knew until someone fixed that delay, every takeoff was a coin toss. Behind him, the maintenance sheds clattered alive again. Someone was cursing over a stripped bolt. Another man hauling a drum of fuel. McKenna bent to pick up a stray piece of safety wire, staring at it between his fingers, a thin, high-tensile strand barely thicker than a guitar string. The kind of thing no one paid attention to, yet in his mind, something clicked. If a fraction of an inch of slack could kill, maybe a fraction of an inch of steel could save. He pocketed the wire without thinking. Just habit, he told himself. Salvage for later. But that small, glinting piece would soon change everything. A simple, illegal, 8-minute fix that would tilt the air war over New Guinea. For now, the sun burned higher. The last lightning vanished into the cloud line, and the field fell silent, except for the buzz of flies and the slow, rhythmic ping of cooling engines. McKenna stood there, hands greasy, heart heavy, knowing something had to give the rules, or the men who followed them. War was measured in numbers, but McKenna remembered faces. He could still see Lieutenant David, Chen grinning under his helmet, California tan already fading under the New Guinea sun. Chen had been a mechanic before the war, like McKenna. They'd bonded over engines, over grease that never seemed to wash off. Chen's first sortie had gone smoothly. The second, not so much. When he landed that day, his left boom was riddled with holes. "She's sluggish in turns," Chen had said, half laughing, half shaking. "Feels like she's half a second behind me." McKenna had nodded, trying to mask what he knew. That half second was the delay, the cable lag. The engineers said it was fine. The manuals said it was fine. But combat didn't care what manuals said. 3 weeks later, Chen was dead. Same story. Couldn't roll out fast enough. Couldn't dive away in time. The official report called it pilot error. McKenna called it predictable. Then came Captain William Morrison. Experienced. Careful. A man other pilots trusted to lead them home. Head survived 11 victories before fate caught him. Morrison's flight intercepted 8 zeros near Oro Bay. Radio chatter crackled through the afternoon haze, then that fatal call, "Controls feel mushy." McKenna had been in the hangar when the message broke off mid-word. Morrison never made it back. His wingman swore the plane just didn't respond in time. McKenna's friend, Rodriguez, another crew chief, jucked through Morrison's wreckage for hours. Every system, every tension gauge, every control point was within spec. They stared at the readings together, silent, both knowing what that meant, that the airplane had obeyed the book, but not the man flying it. By mid-August, McKenna had stopped counting how many names Head written in the maintenance logs beside deceased. 17, maybe more. Most of them kids. Some still joked about prom dates or baseball before climbing into their cockpits. The Air Force wrote their deaths off as poor training, nerves, pilot inexperience. But McKenna knew better. The planes were killing them, not the sky. Every night, after the engines went quiet and the generator hummed low, he'd sit under the hangar lights, fingers raw from wire and oil, and think about that tiny slack inside the cables, 3/8 of an inch. It didn't sound like much, but in a turning fight, it was eternity. He'd grab the aileron line and pull. Feeling that small gap before resistance, it made his stomach twist every time. The squadron's mood darkened with every funeral. Parker's hit hardest. Thomas Parker, Hayes' closest friend. 21, Boston accent thick as molasses, always humming swing tunes while checking his flaps. On August 14th, he didn't come back. 2 zeros caught him isolated over Finschhafen. Hayes heard everything on the radio. Parker's voice cracking as he tried to roll, his screams when the tracers found him, then silence. That night, nobody spoke much in the mess. A few stared into coffee cups. Others cleaned sidearms that didn't need cleaning. Hayes sat alone, jaw tight, face pale. McKenna recognized the look. Had seen it in too many young men who realized their odds had run out. Later, under the dim yellow lights of the hangar, Hayes found him. He didn't shout, didn't plead, just asked quietly, "Is there anything you can do to make her roll faster?" His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. "Anything at all. I don't care if it's regulation." McKenna hesitated. Regulations were ironclad, especially on flight controls. If he altered anything and it failed, he'd face court-martial or worse. He'd kill the man he was trying to save. But looking at Hayes, he saw the desperation of someone already sentenced. The rules weren't saving anyone. "Come back in the morning," McKenna said. "I'll see what I can do." When Hayes left, the hangar fell silent again except for the distant thrum of generators and the hiss of tropical rain against the corrugated roof. McKenna stayed sitting on the floor, staring at the P-Bar-Tam's twin booms, the metal panels glinting faintly in the lamplight. He pulled his ragged notebook closer and scribbled numbers, cable lengths, tension ratings, pulley angles. Then, almost unconsciously, he reached into his pocket and touched the short piece of piano wire Head picked up that morning, a salvaged scrap. It was barely 6 inches long. Stiff and high tensile, the kind of steel used for fine control linkages, not load-bearing. It shouldn't have mattered. But as he rolled it between his fingers, he realized it could be bent into shape. A spacer, maybe, a tensioner. Something small enough to fit inline without being noticed. It was madness. Every rule in the Army Air Force's manual screamed against unauthorized modification. The words within specification echoed like a curse. But so did the screams from Parker's radio. He rose to his feet and walked to Hayes' P-Bar-Tam, parked near the edge of the hangar. The metal was still warm from the day's heat, and the smell of oil and salt air hung thick. Hay laid his hand against the left boom, where the aileron cable disappeared through a small inspection port. That was the artery, the lifeline between pilot and machine. 3/8 of an inch. That's all it took to die. Behind him, thunder rumbled faintly over the mountains. Rain drummed harder on the tin roof. McKenna rolled up his sleeves, checked the wire again, and made his decision. If the regulations couldn't save these men, then maybe something that wasn't regulation could. He switched off the hangar lights one by one, leaving only the faint glow of a single bulb over the workbench. In that yellow pool of light, surrounded by tools, grease, and ghosts, he began preparing for a job that might end his career or save a dozen lives. The rain had stopped by midnight. The air hung thick and heavy, swollen with heat and silence. Inside the hangar, the overhead lights buzzed and flickered, drawing in clouds of insects that tapped and died against the bulbs. McKenna worked alone, sleeves rolled up, tools laid out like instruments before an unholy surgery. The others were asleep, some dreaming, others not daring to, and only the hum of the generator kept him company. Hayes Pibamui Tam stood before him, silver-grey and enormous in the half-light. Its twin booms gleamed with a faint reflection of the lamp's halo, and the black letters stenciled near the nose looked almost like gravestone etchings. McKenna knelt by the left boom, unfastened the inspection panel, and set it aside. Warm metal, even at this hour. He reached in and felt the cable, the same slack, the same whisper of dead space before tension caught. That tiny gap had killed 17 men. It would not kill another. He picked up the salvaged wire, 6 inches of high-tensile piano steel, stiff, stubborn, beautiful in its simplicity. With pliers, he bent it into a Z shape, each angle precise, each corner sharp enough to catch moonlight. The metal fought back. His hand slipped twice, slicing his thumb. Blood slicked the wire, dark and sticky. He didn't curse. He just wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. 8 minutes. That's all it took. 8 minutes to build what Lockheed engineers never thought of. 8 minutes to gamble his career and maybe someone's life. Hayes slid the Z-shaped wire into the control linkage, wedging it between the end of the aileron cable and the pulley. It fit tight, too tight at first, but a little pressure seated it perfectly. The added preload tightened the entire system, removing every fraction of slack. He pulled on the line experimentally, no delay. The cable snapped taut instantly, the aileron surface twitching with precision. For the first time, it felt alive. McKenna exhaled. His shoulders ached from crouching inside the narrow boom, his shirt clinging to sweat. He wiped the last smear of blood from the cable, reattached the inspection panel, and stood back. The lightning now looked exactly as it had before, unchanged. Unremarkable, except that somewhere inside, a 6-inch secret now connected pilot to wing. Hay cleaned his tools, stowed everything back into the wooden chest, and shut off the lights. The night outside was ink dark. He paused by the hangar door, listening to the jungle, insects, faraway waves. Then, faintly, the drone of engines, Japanese night raiders somewhere beyond the clouds. He froze. If they bombed tonight and destroyed the hangar, his modification would vanish before anyone ever knew it existed. But they passed by, heading north. McKenna released a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding. He walked to his bunk around 1 a.m., collapsed without removing his boots, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Every creak of the barrack wood made him think of cables tightening, pulleys shifting, head-broken regulations, violated procedure, tampered with a control system. If Hayes crashed, McKenna would be court-martialed, maybe imprisoned. If it worked, it would just look like luck. No one would ever know. At Sao Bamui, the sun cracked through the mist. McKenna rose before reveille and walked straight to the flight line. The humidity hit him like a slap, wet, hot, and alive. Crews swarmed around the Pibamui Tams, fueling, arming, shouting over the roar of engines. Hayes was already in his flight suit, climbing up the ladder, face pale but steady. McKenna watched him check the flaps, the trim, the stick movement. Smooth, perfect. "Anything different?" Hayes asked, voice raised over the noise. McKenna just said, "Shell feel tighter." Hayes gave a quick nod, not quite trust, but something close, and climbed into the cockpit. At bay, Bunmui high, Hayes lightning lifted from the strip, engines howling, wheels folding up as it climbed into the white sky. McKenna stood on the flight line, shielding his eyes until the aircraft became a speck and vanished. For the next half hour, time didn't move. The ground crew went about their routines. The sound of distant thunder mixed with the static chatter from the radio tent. McKenna tried not to think about what could go wrong: a jammed control, an over-tensioned linkage, the stick locking up mid-turn. But imagination is cruel. Every second stretched into a lifetime. Then the first reports came through. Enemy contact. Huan Gulf. Muiba feet. He froze. Sweat dripped down his neck. The radio operator scribbled notes, adjusted dials, relayed fragments, lightning flight. Diving from sun enemy formation sighted Hayes engaging. Hayes rolled in from altitude. Built speed to nearly Born-Trum MFA. The first burst of machine gun fire lit the sky like angry stars. Hayes fired, missed, then rolled again, instinctively chasing the Zero's dive. And that's when he felt it. No lag. No hesitation. The lightning rolled exactly when his hand moved, instant, alive, precise. It was as if the machine had been waiting all along to obey. He could feel every ounce of lift in the wings, every vibration through the stick. The Zero tried its signature move, snap, roll right and dive. But this time, Hayes stayed with it. He fired again. A short burst, tracers walked up the enemy's fuselage. One round hit the engine, another the cockpit. The Zero erupted in a fireball. Hayes blinked, half in disbelief. No time to think. 3 more Zeros dropped from above, vengeful and fast. He throttled up, tried to climb, but instinct kicked in. Instead of fleeing, he rolled left hard. The P-Bar-Tam snapped over faster than he thought possible. He met the first Zero head-on, guns blazing. The Japanese pilot tried to reverse too late, a clean hit. The wing folded, spiraling down. 2 kills. 30 seconds. The remaining Zeros scissored, trying to outturn him, the same move that had doomed every lightning before. Hayes stayed inside their pattern, reversing faster each time. It was like dancing with ghosts. Every pull, every roll answered immediately, almost telepathically. The third Zero bled too much speed. Hayes squeezed the trigger and shredded it at 200 feet. When the last enemy broke off and fled into the haze, Hayes didn't chase. He was shaking, soaked in sweat, heart hammering like a piston. His hands trembled on the controls, but not from fear, from disbelief. Head just survived. More than that, Head won. 7 minutes later, the P-Bar-Tam touched down at Dobodura. McKenna was already there, watching the approach. The wheels kissed the strip, dust exploding beneath them. When the engines wound down and Hayes climbed out, his eyes were wide and glassy, a grin splitting through exhaustion. He didn't speak at first. Then, quietly, he looked at McKenna and said 2 words. "It worked. That's all." Then he walked away to debrief. McKenna stood there, frozen, the sound of the cooling engines ticking like a heartbeat. He looked at the aircraft. No damage, no scorch marks, no bullet holes that mattered, just a small, invisible piece of wire hidden in the left boom that had changed the rules of combat. He wiped his hands on his coveralls, more out of habit than need, and finally allowed himself to smile. 8 minutes of work. 1 piece of piano wire. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a miracle. The rumor spread faster than any official report. By noon, every pilot at Dobodura airfield had heard some version of it, that Hayes, the quiet farm boy from Iowa, who hadn't scored a single kill in 6 missions, had downed 3 Zeros in 1 sortie. Some said Head gotten lucky. Others swore his lightning had been hot-rodded, tuned to roll faster than anything else in the Pacific. Whatever the story, one thing was certain. Hayes' plane had done the impossible. Captain Frank Mitchell didn't believe in miracles. He was a professional, a squadron leader with 16 pilots under him, and he knew the P-Bar-Tam inside out. When Head watched Hayes' engagement from Lumpfeet that morning, Head noticed something strange. The kid's lightning wasn't just turning tighter, it was snapping into maneuvers, cutting through reversals that should have left it wallowing. Mitchell had flown the same model for months. He knew its rhythm, its inertia, its frustrating lag, and what he saw defied all of it. So, after landing, he went straight to find McKenna. He found him elbow-deep in another aircraft's guts, grease on his forearms, shirt soaked through. "What did you do to Hayes' plane?" Mitchell asked, without ceremony. McKenna hesitated, weighing his options. Then, quietly, he told him. about the cable slack, about the piano wire, about the 8-minute modification that shouldn't exist. Mitchell listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When McKenna finished, Mitchell said, "Can you do it to mine?" That night, the hangar lights burned late again. McKenna repeated the same operation, same piece of Z-shaped wire, same tension adjustment this time on Mitchell's P-bar Muitam. By dawn, another aircraft had crossed the line between regulation and survival. The next morning, Mitchell flew. When he returned, he was laughing, actually laughing something no one had heard in weeks. "It's a different airplane," he told his wingman. "Rolls like a fighter should." His report spread through the squadron like wildfire. Pilots began whispering over coffee, over mess hall trays, over maintenance checklists. Talk to McKenna. Ask for the wire mod. Some crew chiefs refused too risky, too illegal. Others said nothing but watched quietly as tensioners started appearing on more aircraft. By August High Muith, 9 Lightnings carried the modification. By the end of the month, dozens more across New Guinea. No memos, no orders, just word of mouth. Pilot to mechanic, a secret handshake passed through oily fingers and sleepless nights. To hide it, crews became creative. During inspections, the tensioners were removed, the cables checked within specification, and then reinstalled afterward. No one at headquarters knew. But the skies did, because the numbers were changing. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific had lost 2 Lightnings for every 0 they destroyed. By late August, it was 1-to-1. By September, it was better. The kill ratios were shifting, and no one in the command chain could explain why. Meanwhile, Japanese reports started noticing something disturbing. Fighter debriefs from the Mui Muthair fleet mentioned that American P-bar Muitams were suddenly reversing direction faster, unnaturally fast. The maneuvers that had always trapped them, the signature 0 scissors, the bait and roll, no longer worked. One ace, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, among Japan's most legendary pilots, experienced it firsthand on September Bard. 1943 he engaged a Lightning near Wewak. His plan was textbook: draw the American into a turn, then snap roll inside and deliver a burst as the heavy twin-engine fighter struggled to follow. But when Sakai rolled, the P-bar Muitam rolled with him. Instantly. He barely avoided a mid-air collision. The American had matched him move for move. Sakai dove away. Shaken, not beaten, but rattled, he wasn't alone. Other Japanese pilots returned to base uneasy, muttering about strange lightnings that moved too quickly, turned too sharply, seemed to react like living creatures instead of machines. Their commanders dismissed it at first: combat stress, perception errors, exaggerated fear. But after enough wrecks piled up, the pattern became undeniable. The Zero's advantage, that sacred confidence in their agility, was slipping. For 2 years, Japanese pilots had dominated turning fights, convinced they could dance circles around anything American engineers could build. But now, they hesitated. They began fighting differently, cautiously, breaking off earlier. The hunter had started to fear the hunt. Back in New Guinea, the atmosphere changed too. Pilots who had once walked to their planes with the slow dread of condemned men now carried a spark of hope. They no longer felt trapped inside sluggish metal coffins. The aircraft listened to them now. Some described it as a ghost in the controls, others as finally being in sync. Whatever it was, it worked. McKenna became something of a legend, though unofficially. No medals, no orders, no mention in any dispatch, but the men knew. They'd slap his shoulder before takeoff, leave him ration chocolate, or quietly slide his tool tray closer to the shade. In war, gratitude rarely came in words. What the brass didn't understand was that this wasn't just a technical tweak. It was a psychological shift. Pilots fought harder because they believed again, believed their planes could keep up, believed they had a fighting chance. That kind of confidence changes everything. even the way a man pulls a trigger. By the middle of September, Japanese interceptors began reporting heavier losses than ever before. The numbers flipped entirely. 38 zeros down for 22 p-bar. MUTAMs lost. For the first time, the Pacific skies favored the Americans. Yet not one officer's report mentioned piano wire. Not one supply requisition included it. The revolution was hidden inside the steel bones of each lightning, invisible, unsanctioned, and unstoppable. And as McKenna stood on the edge of the airfield, listening to the fading roar of another mission taking off, he knew the war had quietly tilted. Not because of orders, not because of doctrine, but because a few men refused to let paperwork decide who lived and who died. By late September, the change was undeniable. The Bon Chumbay Mui Lump fighter group's combat reports showed a steady rise in victories and a drop in losses that made no mathematical sense. Headquarters analysts pored over engine logs, ammunition usage, pilot rosters, everything except the one place that mattered. The hidden 6-inch wires buried inside the control booms. The engineering officers were puzzled but suspicious. Flight test data showed that some lightnings rolled faster than others. Even though they were supposed to be identical, inspection crews began tightening checks, measuring cable tension readings line by line. That's when inconsistencies appeared. Some planes showed slightly higher tension loads, not enough to raise alarms, but enough to make an inspector frown. One morning, a maintenance officer at Dobodura caught sight of something glinting inside a boom. During a random spot check, a strange Z-shaped insert wedged along a control cable. He reported it, not realizing he'd just uncovered the most successful unauthorized modification of the Pacific War. Within a week, a memo arrived stamped confidential. Engineering review required. McKenna read it with a sinking feeling. He knew what was coming. An inquiry, maybe worse. The tensioners had been installed on dozens of aircraft by now. If command decided it was sabotage or negligence, he'd take the fall. But part of him didn't care anymore. He'd already seen the difference. Pilots would once walked past him with blank eyes, now came back alive, exhilarated, sometimes even smiling. Men like Hayes and Mitchell were proof enough. The investigation crawled up the chain of command, gathering confusion at every level. Some officers wanted heads to roll. Others quietly argued that any modification improving kill ratios during active combat shouldn't be punished. Still, rules were rules, and those rules were written in ink long before bullets started flying. In mid-October, the Army Air Forces finally reached out to Lockheed. An engineering detachment was dispatched to New Guinea. Tasked with examining this field anomaly, they arrived in crisp uniforms, pale from California sunlight, and walked into a war zone where everything smelled of mud, sweat, and burnt aviation fuel. McKenna didn't know whether to salute them or laugh. The engineers took apart one of the modified lightnings. They measured every component, logged every torque and tension, sketched the piano wire tensioner in their notebooks. For days, they worked under the same roof where McKenna had made his illicit modification months earlier. Only now, the same act that could have gotten him jailed was being analyzed like a scientific discovery. After a week of flight tests, they wrote their report. The verdict: the modification was safe, effective, and should be incorporated into future models. The wire eliminated the control lag that had plagued early P-bar MUTAMs. It didn't overstress the system. It actually balanced cable wear more evenly. Lockheed engineers quietly admitted the field crews had beaten them to the solution. But military bureaucracy doesn't celebrate rule breakers, it reclassifies them. The official paperwork credited factory engineering refinement following operational feedback. McKenna's name never appeared. By December 1943, the new P-Bay MUTAM rolled off the production line with redesigned cable routing and tension adjusters. Officially, the improvement came from internal engineering review. Unofficially, it came from a grease-covered mechanic on a humid night in New Guinea who just couldn't stand watching another kid die. The transformation didn't just change the aircraft, it changed the war's psychology. The Zero's once unshakable dominance had cracked. American pilots started taking fights they would have avoided months earlier. They began winning them. The Japanese command noticed, issuing orders to avoid lightning encounters unless superior in number. In war, that kind of reversal doesn't go unnoticed. Senior officers claimed it was new tactics, improved training, or divine luck. But among the pilots, a quiet truth passed like a superstition. If your crew chief was brave enough to tune the strings, your odds went up. McKenna never sought recognition. When a colonel finally confronted him, paperwork in hand, he simply said, "Sir, the men were dying. I fixed the cables." That was all. The colonel didn't reply. He just folded the papers back into his briefcase and left. The report disappeared into archives. It was a strange victory, the kind born in the cracks between obedience and necessity. No medals, no commendations, just a better machine and fewer empty bunks. Still, McKenna couldn't help but feel a quiet pride when he saw the new 38s Outturn bulletin come through in December, describing modified aileron cable system for improved roll response. He smiled. The factory fix looked eerily familiar. He went back to work that night as usual, tightening bolts, checking engines, feeling the vibration of steel against skin. The jungle hummed outside, and the air smelled of oil and wet dirt. In the distance, another lightning took off under a swollen orange moon. He watched it rise until it vanished into the dark, thinking about all the pilots who might finally come home because of something simple, something forbidden, something right. The war would keep raging, the sky would keep burning, but the balance had shifted. Somewhere, deep inside each lightning now roaring over the Pacific, a thin piece of piano wire still sang quietly, the sound of a rule broken for all the right reasons. The war rolled on, but the names began to last longer. Pilots who would have been memorials in July were coming back, landing with engines coughing and wings torn but landing. The men of the Born Chumbay Mui Lumph called it luck, though the ground crews knew it was something closer to grace born of steel and defiance. By early Mutngin Chincham Bon Mui Born, the skies over New Guinea looked different. The Zero was no longer a hunter's silhouette, but a fading ghost. American pilots no longer feared the slow roll into combat. They met it head-on, confident their lightnings would answer instantly, faithfully the way a machine should when lives depend on it. McKenna never asked for credit. He stayed behind the line, turning wrenches, signing maintenance logs with the same quick scrawl as before. Occasionally, he'd hear a pilot laughing on the tarmac after a fight, voice full of that impossible joy reserved for men would, stared into death and blinked first. Those moments were enough. When the war ended in Mutngin Chincham Bonwilam, Lieutenant Hayes flew home to Iowa. He'd shot down 11 enemy aircraft, all in a plane that bore McKenna's secret. He married his high school sweetheart, bought a small farm, and later became a crop duster, still flying, still chasing the horizon. Every August Mui Baith, he called McKenna just to say thank you. 2 words, same as that morning on the runway. It worked. Captain Frank Mitchell stayed in the service. He led a squadron through the Philippines and into the final pushes toward Japan. By the time he retired, as a colonel in Mutngin Chin Chum Saumui Ba, had made sure every young maintenance officer he mentored heard McKenna's story, or at least the version he could tell. Sometimes, he'd say, the best engineering doesn't come from an office. It comes from a man who can't stand watching another coffin take off. McKenna himself stayed with the Army Air Forces until Mutngin Chin Chum Bonmui Sao, then returned to California. He opened a small garage in Long Beach, just another sign over a sun-bleached street. Have fixed engines, carburetors, timing belts. He never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd shrug and say, "I was a mechanic, fixed planes." That was all. Decades passed. The world moved on to jet engines and cold wars, to new metals and new doctrines, but the old stories lingered, as they always do, waiting for someone to dig them up. In 1991, a military historian researching P-bar Muitam field modifications stumbled across several vague maintenance notes from 1943. Each log included an odd phrase. Adjusted cable preload, pilot reports improved roll response. The historian traced the signatures, found McKenna's name, and finally tracked him down 73 years old, still working part-time in that same Long Beach garage. He remembered the night instantly, almost sheepishly. It wasn't much, he told the historian. Just something that needed doing. When asked how many lives he thought it saved, McKenna shrugged. Didn't count. I just remember the ones who came back. The historian's later analysis suggested the modification might have saved between 80 and 100 pilots across the Pacific theater. A fraction of the total war, maybe, but an ocean of lives all the same. McKenna died in Haingin Sao, age 88. His obituary mentioned his wartime service, but not the piano wire, not the night in the hangar, not the hundreds of missions flown with his unseen signature coiled inside their wings. It simply read, James McKenna mechanic, husband, father, but in a small office at the back of that same Long Beach garage. A faded photograph still hangs, a young man in oil-stained coveralls, standing beside a P-bar Muitam Lightning, squinting into the sun. On the back, written in pencil, August 1943, Dobodura. That's how history remembers most of its true innovators, not with medals or headlines, but with fingerprints left on the machinery of survival. Wars are rarely turned by orders shouted from headquarters. They're turned by small acts of rebellion, by men who see what's wrong and fix it before someone tells them not to. The story of the piano wire is a story of war stripped of glory, of rules broken for the right reasons, of courage without a witness. So the next time you hear about a great victory or a new invention born from battle, remember this. Somewhere, beneath the noise of engines and explosions, there's always a pair of hands tightening a bolt, wiping off grease, doing what needs to be done. Because history doesn't just belong to the heroes who fly. It belongs to the ones who make sure they can come back down. If you found this story as moving as we did, take a moment to like this video. It helps us bring more of these forgotten stories to light. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's Texas or Tasmania, veterans or dreamers. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the smallest piece of wire can hold up the weight of history.